order. Mr Gregory Campbell to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Betts. I beg to move that this House considers the independent accountability of the BBC commissioning process. I'm delighted to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Betts, and also that the Minister is here to reply, as she has done on previous occasions. I am grateful for the opportunity to highlight the lack of transparency at the BBC. There are major concerns about BBC Northern Ireland's use of public money. I am unaware of other regions, but if other regions operate on a similar basis to that which I will outline in the next few minutes, then there is a problem on a national scale. I will focus on transparency in Northern Ireland because BBC NI has not done so. The BBC's key aim is, to quote, to inform, educate and entertain audiences with programmes and services of high quality, originality and value, end of quote. And yes, there are many programmes where the BBC's mission is adhered to, but when it comes to the financing and contracting of those programmes, there is a lack of transparency which should not be the practice. These programmes are only made as a result of the outdated licence fee which our constituents are forced to pay if they receive television services. However, despite this being public money, after many protracted discussions, meetings and correspondence, the brick wall remains, although it can and it will be broken down. Yes, I will.
Thank you for giving way and thank you for bringing this. This has been an issue that the honourable gentleman has been involved in for a long time. And today's debate at Westminster Hall is his opportunity to highlight that. And I thank the member for raising the issue. Does the honourable member not agree that the growing amount of those who are refusing to pay a TV licence, understanding that this means that they will not watch any BBC programme, either in live time or catch-up, is an indication that whilst people are happy to pay £50 a month for Sky or Virgin, they are not prepared to give the BBC £12 a month. And this disenfranchisement is not to do with the cost of the licence, rather to do with the nature of programming, with many people grossly unhappy with the BBC bias, which has become the norm, but remains unacceptable. And does he further agree that independent regulation is only the first step needed if there to be any salvation whatsoever for the BBC?
Yes, I thank the member for that intervention, and indeed the compulsory nature of the licence fee is something that has been raised on previous occasions, and I am glad that he raised it again today. But troubling questions do remain on the issue of independent accountability. Independent media companies in Northern Ireland have approached me, and they are concerned that they do not get a fair deal due to the lack of transparency. And I intend to go into that in a little detail, Mr Betts. I first raised concerns about the BBC Northern Ireland commissioning process back in November 2016. That's 2 years and 4 months ago, when I asked a series of questions of the BBC. Some members will recall that I raised similar matters in the House in September 2017. I was then forced down this route after BBC Northern Ireland kept stonewalling. Initially, I raised the question of how contracts were awarded. I raised this with senior BBC management, also some of those who were BBC presenters and who had benefited from the contracts. Answers were not forthcoming. I then took the matter, as a result of the lack of accountability and openness, I then took the matter to the BBC Director General, Lord Tony Hall's office in April 2018. My questions still not having had satisfactory responses. My concern then focused, as an example, Mr Betts, on a single contract that I was aware of to a company called Third Street Studios. There are 3 points to ponder in relation to Third Street Studios and this contract. The contract I alluded to was awarded to a company which didn't exist at the time of the broadcast, and the contract having already been paid. Second thing is, this particular company has repeatedly received contracts worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. And the third thing, and this is the irony, Mr Betts, this company had no office, and the postal address on its website took anyone who investigated to a taxi rank in Belfast city centre. The lack of independent accountability for these significant sums is staggering. By August 2018, I still wasn't getting answers. I then went to the National Audit Office here in London to try and obtain satisfaction about taxpayers' money and those who were on, if I could put it, on the inside track in the BBC and how they did not account for their expenditure. I met then with the National Audit Office. They wrote to me and were very helpful. The meeting was good, was constructive, and were helpful in writing to me, confirming that while they do not normally investigate this type of contractual expenditure, an investigation would be opened up into a number of areas concerning the BBC Northern Ireland commissioning process. I just want to concentrate on this for a few moments, Mr. Bett, just to get the significance of this. This is the first time, to my knowledge, that the National Audit Office of the United Kingdom has found grounds to investigate BBC Northern Ireland on a contract of this nature. Unprecedented would be a word that would be appropriate to describe this. Let's just remember what the guidelines are that the BBC operate under. I'll quote them briefly. Editorial integrity and independence. Quote, the BBC is independent of outside interests and arrangements that could undermine our editorial integrity. Our audience should be confident that our decisions are not influenced by outside interests, political or commercial pressures, or any personal interests. End of quote. In fairness, they say, our output will be based on fairness, openness, honesty, and straight dealing. End of quote. Transparency. We will be transparent about the nature and provenance of the content we offer online. Where appropriate, we will identify who has created it and will use labelling to help online users make informed decisions about the suitability of content for themselves and their children. And then lastly, accountability. We are accountable to our audiences and will deal fairly and openly with them. Their continuing trust in the BBC is a crucial part of our relationship with them. We will be open in acknowledging mistakes when they are made and encourage a culture of willingness to learn from them. End of quote. Yes, I will.
Thank you. Given that last year I was the only Labour MP to join with most members of the DUP in defending press freedom when there was a chance of a state-appointed press regulator, will the honourable member recognise that investigations like that into the RHI issue by BBC Northern Ireland are in the long tradition of fearless investigative journalism by both the BBC and UTV that have served Northern Ireland well during the last 50 years in both good times and bad?
Yes, unequivocally I agree with that, and the only addendum I would add to it is that they are not exempt from scrutiny themselves. That's the point. It is an appalling reflection on BBC Northern Ireland's management that a Member of Parliament who has taken a keen interest in these issues, both in Parliament and outside, has had to take the steps I have over many months to escalate concerns to the National Audit Office.
The honourable member give way.
Yes, I will.
May I support the case that he's making, Mr. Betts? When we did the BBC Charter Review, we were keen to get independent regulation for the BBC through Ofcom and to open up the BBC's books to the National Audit Office, which they resisted. The BBC can be opaque and not transparent. But having said that, would he also agree with me that I don't think it advances the argument for accountability and transparency simply, as some honourable members have, to accuse the BBC of bias? I think it tries very hard to present a balanced picture.
Yes, I accept the honourable member's intervention, and I just would invite him to have a look at some more of the BBC content, and perhaps he may reflect on his view, but we shall have another debate, I'm sure, on that in the months to come. I want to move on then to the specific example I raised. Third Street Studios has a director who is also a prominent BBC Northern Ireland presenter, a Mr. Stephen Nolan. The BBC claim Mr. Nolan is an average independent production company. This is patent nonsense. Quite regularly, Mr. Nolan advertises his television programmes, which his own company makes, on his BBC radio show, which is part of his £450,000 per year licence fee funded job. This is a clear unfair advantage over other independent production companies who cannot promote their programmes in the same way. And I would simply outline this, Mr Betts. If an independent production company gets a contract from the BBC, they then have to go away, do the programme, make it, supply it to the BBC, and hope that the quality of the production will shine through. But in this instance that I have outlined, someone who works in the BBC, who has the inside track, who knows how it works, can then get a contract and then advertise on the BBC for his so-called independent production company production that he has got from the BBC. Quite clearly an unfair advantage. Since the BBC is effectively funded through the public purse, it must adhere to the same standards that other areas of public life demand. The contract I referred to a few moments ago, Mr Betts, was in 2014, 5 years ago. I was asking questions, and I'm still asking questions, for 2 years about this contract. And I still don't know the basic details of this contract, which we all pay for through the licence fee, which the public have paid for and have a right to know the details of how it was awarded and how the expenditure was accounted for. We don't know that. Why should a contract that was awarded 5 years ago remain a secret? Why not publish the documentation relevant to that series this length of time after it, unless there is something to hide? That's why the National Audit Office are digging and digging deep, I hope, into the BBC. The irony is that BBC Northern Ireland programmes continue to investigate the use of public money when it comes to government, as outlined by my honourable friend. And they are right to do so. No one should misunderstand the nature of this debate this morning, Mr Betts. The BBC and others are right to do that. But we are equally right to hold them to the same standard that they hold others. They are not exempt, and they must not be exempt. Many will know the concerns that I and others have, and they do not just stretch to the commissioning process of programmes. I have long campaigned for maximum transparency in relation to pay. We now know that there exists a gender pay gap, but it took a decade for the BBC to come to the point of publishing the salaries of those presenters who were earning more than £150,000 per year. Does the BBC hope that by stringing people along on the issue of commissioning contracts, that issue might disappear? Just as they dragged their feet on salaries and openness there, do they think that they can drag their feet on this? They must think again. Why should the BBC feel that they can pose questions, but they don't have to answer them? It's only for the little people to answer questions. They pose them, not answer them. They must and will answer the questions, Mr Betts. The National Audit Office sent me a letter dated the 30th of January this year, just last week. Coincidentally, it was the day after this date was announced. I will leave people to draw their own conclusion, but that's the date on the letter. This letter says, quote, "The BBC centrally have decided to carry out a targeted review of the commissioning process in BBC Northern Ireland." And they added, quote again, "We are currently reviewing information collected as part of this review and are following up with some specific questions," unquote. The Audit Office has confirmed it will provide answers to the questions originally asked of the BBC in 2016 by the end of this month. The BBC, in trying to protect and defend those involved, have further undermined trust in that organisation. I look forward to the completion of the National Audit Office investigation. I understand the Secretary of State will be visiting Northern Ireland next month, as he did so in answer to my parliamentary question last week, and I hope he will take the opportunity to have questions answered with the BBC in Northern Ireland when he arrives. I also hope that the Minister present today, who has been very helpful and responsive in the past in answering questions, will, in discussions she may have with the BBC in the run-up to the mid-term charter review, which will take place in the course of the next 2 years, will deal with this issue. Mr Betts, in conclusion, I really do hope that my worst fears are not confirmed. But all of the information I have gleaned to date, and all of the stonewalling, all of the delaying, all of the attempting not to answer questions, does not fill me with hope. I hope the National Audit Office will get to the truth of these matters, and if it is the case that there are very, very serious questions to answer about the lack of transparency, not just in BBC Northern Ireland, but across the nation, then it will be a national scandal, and there will have to be very serious consequences for the BBC hierarchy, not just in BBC NI, but across the nation as a whole. Thank you.